Hello, wildlings. I'm your Creepsmith, and you found my Fear Forge. Lucky you. Welcome back, wildlings, and thank you for joining us for tonight's abominable account. Exploding Head Syndrome by Tsami Tsunami. Identifying Exploding Head Syndrome, or EHS. An uncommon phenomenon that causes a person, usually female, to suffer from sudden, loud, and unexplainable noises right upon the verge of sleep. Noises which are jarring and can sound like the popping of fireworks, gunshots, the bang of slamming doors, and even loud explosions. In some cases, violent screaming or sobbing is heard. The most exceptional thing to note about the sleep disorder that is EHS is that noises do not occur within the head. Sounds are out of body and can be heard anywhere up to a block away by both ears. Although very little is known about this condition, psychiatrists speculate that EHS occurs when certain synapses in the brain fire off rather than settle down. What synapses or why, however, is still unknown. No one has proven this theory to be true. Doctors aren't even sure where to begin looking, let alone find an actual cure or even remedy. Many subjects have claimed that a little rest and relaxation can help, but that EHS never truly leaves those afflicted, and those with insomnia experience it much worse. Some claim to see flashes of light, even short bursts of unexplainable pain along with the noises. In some extreme cases, EHS can develop into a more serious mental illness. When I was a kid, maybe 10 or 11 years old, I began hearing things right at the verge of sleep. You know that point I'm talking about, where you're still semi-conscious and things are fuzzy, but you're still aware? That's the state I'm talking about. I'd be moments from drifting off to dreamland when, bam, this horrible loud noise would startle me awake. For the life of me, I couldn't really explain to you what the noises were or what they sounded like. I don't know. But it was loud and it scared the shit out of me. For the first few months, it happened maybe once, twice a week. I couldn't really explain it, and I was terrified of bringing it up to my mother because I didn't know if she'd believe me. I was an imaginative kid after all, so I kept it to myself right up until I got to my teens. I remember those nights. Sometimes I didn't even get sleep. Time after time, just as my exhausted brain would begin to drift, bam! And again I'd be wide awake, full of terror and paranoia. Occasionally, on particularly bad nights, I would hear other things. High-pitched noises, like screaming. It's the only thing I can think of to relate it to. The final straw was the night that I kept hearing the banging. It was aggressive, and I was so out of it that I didn't even need to close my eyes. I was constantly in that semi-conscious state, trapped with those damn noises, when finally I saw a bright light flash through my room. It lit every nook and cranny of the room like a flashbang. It made my skin hurt just being near it, even though it was there and gone in less than a second. It woke me up completely, and I didn't even sleep that night at all. I didn't even try. So I finally told my mom. I couldn't take it anymore. It had gotten to the point that I was failing every class because I was dozing off constantly. I was lethargic, exhausted, and it felt like my brain had begun to shut down. I felt like I was going insane. She didn't believe me at first, and I don't blame her. I wouldn't have believed me either. She hadn't heard any of the noises that I told her about, and the fact that I had heard them was even more strange to her. Why did I experience it when she and Dad hadn't? My inability to describe the sounds didn't help her either. It took some coaxing, a little bringing up of grades, but finally she agreed to take me to a psychiatrist for a mental evaluation. Not exactly what I was hoping for, but then again, who else to go to but a psych doctor? After a few tests, a few more weeks, and countless sleepless nights, they still had nothing but a hunch as to what my problem was. They guessed that it was a rare form of synesthesia, the abnormality that causes senses in the brain to fuse together. They assumed that was why I was seeing and hearing things at the same time, but because I only had one occurrence of that, and because of my condition, they needed to do more intensive tests, the kind that our insurance wouldn't cover. My mother rejected the offer immediately, even though they offered to cut the bill, since I was a bit of an abnormality. I still don't blame her. I saw the cost after it had been cut, and it was far more than we could afford. So, as a last-ditch effort to help me, they prescribed me a drug called Serenoxamil, or Serenu, as it was written in some fancy scribble on the bottle. But in order to do so, they had to go for their second theory as to what was wrong with me. They diagnosed me with paranoid delusional schizophrenia. Not something anyone wants to hear, especially at only 13, with the knowledge that they're not crazy. Fortunately, the drug worked a little like paraphenazine, an antipsychotic medication, and methylphenidate, an ADHD medication. I know that sounds weird because they're exact opposites of each other. One blocks dopamine, the other releases it. Apparently the hat trick here was to try and regulate my brain. Serenu wasn't on the shelves yet, and it was still in testing, so I was a guinea pig, but at least it was free. And I could tell myself that I wasn't actually taking an antipsychotic medication. At least, not technically. The first night with the medication brought me silence and dreamless sleep. And the following night, and the one after that, and so on and so forth. It was wonderful. I mean, sure, it made my head feel like a fuzzball most of the time, and the side effects weren't great, but I could sleep. It made the noises stop completely. I managed to pull my grades out of the gutter, and even graduated at the top of my class 5 years later. I still thought about it, though. The idea that I'd been wrongfully diagnosed for all those years. It set me a little on edge. I mean, if I thought about it for too long. It made the noises stop, but really, what was wrong with me? After moving into my own apartment and putting a little hold on college for a while, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I couldn't exactly afford good mental health care even with the insurance I had, so I went for the internet with my fingers crossed and hoped for the best. They say never to look a gift horse in the mouth, but I was curious. I managed to find a medical site with a recently posted blog about a sleep disorder called exploding head syndrome. All I'd done was type my symptoms in and popped right up. There it was. Everything matched up perfectly. The only problem? No one really knew what it was. They knew the symptoms and narrowed it down to the time of the phenomenon in the brain, but nothing else. It was a completely new topic in the medical field, despite the claim that it had been documented for ages. I thought I was back to square one until I happened on a forum for people with EHS. Now, like any good researcher, I immediately went in to interview people on their personal experiences. Thankfully, everyone that I spoke to was very informative. Many even suggested that I try simple sleep aids, like melatonin, for instance. I compared what I could remember of my sleepless nights to their accounts, and with every passing minute, I became more and more convinced that all I had was a simple sleep disorder. Everything matched up too perfectly to suggest otherwise. Just as I was about to log off and get off the internet, a new person joined the chat room. His name was The Watcher, and he introduced himself as such. At first, he seemed a little arrogant, listing off all his symptoms in an almost hoity-toity manner. But after I informed him that I'd concluded my interviews and had come to a personal decision, he asked me what all of this investigating was about. So I explained to him my situation in the most detail that I felt comfortable with, and he asked me what kind of medication I was on. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a habitually private person, but I also know how important it is not to be too open on the internet. This guy, though, I felt like he was looking at me under a microscope. We were only in a chat room, merely words on a screen, but something just felt off. Despite my better judgment, I told him about the Serenu. By this time, the drug had passed all of its FDA regulatory testing and had been on the public market for almost 3 years, so it was common knowledge. Then I asked him why it was important, and he dodged that question at first, and instead he rattled off things about the drug that I already knew, until finally making a point that it was a very good drug for people with advanced cases of EHS. But by this time, I'd already made up my mind. I was going to stop the Serenu and start taking homeopathic sleep aids instead. Again, yes, it worked, but that fuzzy head feeling had worn out its welcome after 5 years, not to mention the occasional nausea, the loss of appetite, stomach cramps, all the other side effects. I began to type out a message thanking the Watcher when he posted again. It was one single word: wait. I looked down at my message box to see my half-typed goodbye still waiting, and felt a shiver run down my spine. And another message popped up almost immediately after. Don't go yet, please. This is very important. I instinctively checked my security programs and saw nothing. If this dude was hacking, he was doing a fairly good job of it. I stared at his message, gave a moment of consideration before deleting my departing message and simply responding with, "Okay, what?" His response was quick and to the point. "Don't stop taking Serenoxamil." So with a sigh, I sent back, "Why?" He responded with, "Because it's the only thing keeping them from finding you." Now I was fully freaked out and possibly a tiny bit irritated. Was this guy fucking with me? I didn't really expect trolls to dwell on medical forms, but I guess they're everywhere. Still, I didn't leave the chat. A golden rule of the internet is never to feed the trolls, but I will admit I was curious to see where this was going, so I asked what he meant and who they were. Now, I wish I'd never asked. This is what he posted back to me. EHS has been around for centuries, but only recently has it gained any medical attention. The reason? More people have it now. And why do more people have it? Because they're getting hungrier. They're becoming gluttonous and greedy, so they're making more and more people grist for the feast. Those sounds you heard? It's simple. That's them attempting to open the door to our world. Those sounds are echoes of their dimension slamming into ours, and only the unlucky hear their warning. That light you saw, that's the door being yanked open. But if you wake in time, the door will close. That's why it only appears as a flash. Your final warning is the pain. You mentioned your skin feeling as if it were burning, but that's only a side effect of being so close to the door opening. No, the real pain felt by those with EHS is much worse. It's like flesh being rended from bone. Their claws dig deep into your skin, but again, if you manage to wake in time, it'll stop. Unfortunately, there will never be any proof of them ever touching you, not a single mark on your body, as if it never happened. The reason that I beg you not to stop your medication is because it's the only thing keeping them from finding you. You may think that it's only a dopamine regulator, but to them, it's more than that. Those synapses firing off in your brain act like a locator, a blip on their GPS, and only when your mind is in that twilight state between waking and sleeping can they find you. And then they can take you. Now your medication is acting like a restrictor. It's preventing them from finding you again and taking you. You didn't make it to the final stage of EHS, but it sounds like you were very close. So please, please, if you value your life, don't stop taking the medication. They will find you if you do. I'm a pretty open-minded person, but this was ridiculous. I let the watcher speak his piece before closing out the window and shutting down my computer. I didn't even try to write a farewell. It was too late and I was too tired. I hadn't even noticed how long I'd actually been on the internet, but once I got off, I realized it was far too late to take my medication. I remember feeling a twinge of guilt and a little bit of fear at the time, but I brushed it aside and decided to go to bed without any more help from my Serenu. I'd already made my decision anyway, and there was no risk of seizure or stroke if I stopped abruptly. Besides, I wasn't crazy, I just had a sleep disorder. In the morning, I'd go out and buy some simple sleep aids, and then get back to a normal life without the fog of these medications. That night, I got the best sleep I'd ever experienced. The next morning I did exactly as planned, picked up a couple of bottles of melatonin along with some generic stuff from the medicine aisle. For about a week after that, everything was wonderful. No more fog, no more side effects, not a single noise. But all that changed a few nights ago. To be honest, I can't really remember how long it has actually been. I haven't slept in that long. It all started when I took a few sleep aids before bed. I took them a little earlier than usual, but I felt like dosing as I watched some mindless TV before turning in. It had to have kicked in rather quickly because the next thing I remember, I was being woken by a loud slam from somewhere in my house. And as I opened my eyes, I saw a blinding flash from across my living room. In an instant, I lost power and everything in my home went completely dark. All I could see was that damned after image from the flash in pitch darkness. I don't know if I could ever explain the fear I felt in that moment. Not being able to see, not knowing if someone was creeping up on me at that moment, it was horrible. I panicked for a brief moment before talking myself into believing that it was only a power surge. It didn't explain the noise, but I just tried to ignore that fact. Within a few minutes, the electricity came back on, and I stayed up for a few more hours before the drowsiness became too much, and I headed off to bed. Again, I was nearly asleep when it happened, flash and all in my dark room. By the time the sun had risen the next morning, it had happened maybe 5 or 6 more times, and I hadn't gotten any sleep at all. It happened again the next night, and the next after that. I'm taking caffeine pills now instead. I'm scared to fall asleep. but I can feel myself slipping. These past few hours I've been jarred into consciousness by this horrible pain in my legs, and there's this new noise. It comes in intervals. I think it's saying my name. I think they're saying my name. I can't be sure, but I assume that's what it is. I can't help but think of the Watcher's warning, and I should have listened. I can't even remember where my Serenu is now, but I've got this feeling it's too late anyway. They've already found me. Soon, I'll end up stuck in that constant state of semi-consciousness, and then they'll be able to grab me whenever they wish. I'd imagine they've worked up quite an appetite, trying to get me. The only thing keeping me awake now is focusing on writing this. I'm not sure what it's supposed to be, a memoir, maybe a warning. Let's just call it a friendly word of advice. Now, why should you believe me instead of writing this off as the words of some crazy person who never should have stopped taking their antipsychotic medication? Why should you believe me when I tell you that the Watcher was actually right, when even I didn't believe him? And why should you go looking for help immediately if you're experiencing symptoms of EHS? It's pretty simple, actually. It's the only reason I know that what is happening to me is real. The reason I know they're real. It's the reason my mother refused to believe me at first, and why the psychiatrists insisted on further testing. It should be physically impossible for me to experience the symptoms of EHS. I shouldn't be able to hear the things that I do. The loud noises, the high-pitched noises, the noises that sound like they're calling my name. Even now, as I'm telling you this, I can hear it. I hear them. But I shouldn't be able to hear any of it. I was born deaf. So, wildlings, stay scary, sweet dreams, and make the most of your nights.